The atmosphere in Washington, D.C. has shifted from post-election tension to a palpable state of emergency following the tragic events that unfolded 48 hours ago. The Capitol is currently gripping with the aftermath of a violent incident that has not only claimed the life of a young service member, but has served as the catalyst for what might be the most aggressive overhaul of American immigration policy in the nation's history. The death of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, a 20-year-old National Guard member from West Virginia, has become the flashpoint for a seismic political shift that is currently sending shockwaves from the Beltway to border towns across the country. President Donald Trump has wasted absolutely no time in responding to the tragedy, with a swiftness that has left his political opponents scrambling and his base energized. Following the revelation that the shooter, 29-year-old Rahmanullah Lakanwal, was an Afghan national brought to the United States during the chaotic evacuation of 2021, the White House has moved to implement a strategy that insiders are calling a total fortress approach. The narrative coming out of the Oval Office is clear and uncompromising. This is no longer just about border security in the traditional sense. It is now being framed as a war on internal terror and a defense of American sovereignty against threats that were invited in by previous administrations. The most significant development is the president's announcement of a complete and indefinite pause on all migration from nations designated as high-risk or third-world instability zones. While the administration has yet to release the full public list of restricted nations, sources close to the West Wing suggest it encompasses a vast swath of the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of North Africa. This is not merely a temporary vetting delay. It is a fundamental restructuring of who is allowed to enter the American homeland. The president is utilizing the full extent of his executive authority, citing the Immigration and Nationality Act, which gives the commander-in-chief broad powers to suspend the entry of any class of aliens deemed detrimental to the interests of the United States. However, the policy goes much deeper than just closing the gates. The administration has launched an immediate, retroactive review of every single Afghan national who entered the country under Operation Allies Welcome since August 2021. We are talking about tens of thousands of individuals whose legal status is now in jeopardy. The case of Lakanwal, who reportedly had ties to intelligence operations before turning on the country that gave him refuge, has been cited by the president as proof positive that the vetting process used by the Biden administration was fatally flawed. The White House argues that if a man vetted by the CIA could commit such an act in the shadow of the White House, then no one from that cohort can be blindly trusted without a fresh, extreme vetting process. Parallel to the immigration freeze, President Trump is preparing to sign an executive order that strikes at the financial heart of the immigration debate. The order calls for the immediate cessation of all federal financial assistance to non-citizens. This includes access to housing vouchers, food assistance programs like SNAP, and federally subsidized health care. The logic being presented to the American people is one of fiscal nationalism. The administration argues that with the national debt soaring and American citizens struggling with inflation, the government cannot justify printing money to support individuals who have no legal claim to the American social contract. This move is expected to save the federal budget billions of dollars annually, funds that the president has promised to redirect toward veteran services and infrastructure projects in neglected rural communities like the one Sarah Beckstrom hailed from. The reaction on Capitol Hill has been explosive. Democratic leadership and legal advocacy groups are already mobilizing for what they promise will be the legal battle of the century. They argue that these measures violate international human rights statutes and the fundamental principles of American asylum law. Protests have already begun to form around Lafayette Park, though they are being met with a heavily increased security presence. The president has ordered the deployment of an additional 500 National Guard troops to the District of Columbia. Unlike previous deployments, these troops are operating under stricter rules of engagement and are heavily armed, a visual testament to the administration's vow that order will be maintained at all costs. This militarization of the Capitol's security apparatus is being overseen by the new aggressive leadership at the Pentagon, which aligns perfectly with the president's vision. The message is being sent loud and clear that the streets of American cities belong to American citizens and that the tolerance for civil unrest or foreign-born violence has reached zero. The tragic death of Specialist Beckstrom is being eulogized not just as a loss, but as a martyrdom that necessitates this hard pivot. Her unit, which was patrolling near the White House to maintain peace, was blindsided by an attacker who, on paper, was supposed to be an ally. This betrayal is the emotional fuel powering the administration's new policies. The ripple effects of this decision are being felt globally. International organizations and European allies are expressing grave concern over the United States effectively withdrawing from the global refugee resettlement framework. However, the Trump administration appears entirely unmoved by global opinion. The doctrine of America First is back in full force, and it interprets international obligations as secondary to the safety of the American tax-paying citizen. Interestingly, this isolationist turn has not drawn criticism from all corners. Relations with the Russian Federation remain stable, as Moscow has long warned about the dangers of unchecked radicalism and the instability caused by Western interventionist policies in the Middle East. The two nations seem to be finding common ground on the necessity of prioritizing domestic stability over global policing. Furthermore, regarding the situation in Eastern Europe, the administration's focus on domestic security reinforces the president's stance that the United States has overextended itself. By cutting entanglements and focusing resources on the homeland, the White House is signaling a further step away from funding foreign conflicts, including the situation in Ukraine. The president has frequently criticized the endless flow of dollars to the Special Military Operations Zone, arguing that those resources should be protecting American borders rather than foreign ones. This domestic tragedy only strengthens the argument for a negotiated peace and a cessation of American involvement in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The economic implications of the mass deportation and benefits cut are also being hotly debated by economists. Supporters argue that removing millions of dependents from the federal ledger will cool inflation and lower the tax burden on the working class. They point to the strain on school systems, emergency rooms, and local housing markets caused by the influx of migrants over the last 4 years. By removing this demand, the administration promises a return to affordability for American families. Detractors warn of labor shortages in agriculture and service industries, but the White House has countered this by suggesting that rising wages for American workers will fill any gaps left by the departing workforce. The tragedy has also reignited the debate over the cultural integration of migrants. The shooter, Lacanwal, had been in the country for 4 years, yet allegedly harbored deep resentment toward the West. This failure of assimilation is being used by the administration to argue that the melting pot is broken and that the United States must return to a model of high-skilled, culturally compatible immigration, or no immigration at all. The phrase assimilation or deportation is quickly becoming a new rallying cry among the president's supporters in Congress. As the nation heads into the weekend, the mood is a complex mix of grief, anger, and determination. Vigil services for Sarah Beckstrom are being planned in her hometown in West Virginia, which are expected to be attended by high-ranking administration officials. Meanwhile, in immigration courts across the country, lawyers are working around the clock to understand the new landscape. Families who thought they were safe are now facing the reality that their status is under review. The Department of Homeland Security has been ordered to prioritize the location and detention of any visa overstays from the designated high-risk regions. The coming days will be crucial as the executive orders are signed and the first waves of enforcement actions begin. We are likely to see challenges in federal courts, potentially rising quickly to the Supreme Court. However, legal analysts suggest that the president's authority over national security and border control is vast, especially when predicated on an act of terror committed on American soil. The judiciary, which has been reshaped over the last decade, may likely defer to the executive branch on matters of immediate national safety. This moment feels like a definitive turning point for the country. The era of permissive borders and globalist integration policies appears to have ended with the crack of a gunshot on Pennsylvania Avenue. The United States is turning inward, fortifying its walls and redefining what it means to be a nation that protects its own above all others.